So when you have inequalities that involve multiplication and division, sometimes it's just like normal, just like an equation, and then other times you have to do a little extra step. And so you'll see what that is when we get down to example 2. But example 1, again, is just very similar to equations. So we're going to drop our line, we're going to say to ourselves, self, what operation do I have? I have division, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 8 to undo this division. So when you multiply by 8, you get x is greater than negative 40. That's your answer. And it says to graph, so we'll also make a graph, so negative 40. And we're not allowed to be equal, so it's an open circle, and we go greater. Try letter B on your own. All right, hopefully you match. Now let's look at example 2. So you go through the steps, you say no big deal, I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 3. And you get y is greater than negative 6. Okay, so you circle it, you say there's my answer. Okay, but now remember a long time ago, I used to always encourage you to check. We haven't been checking recently, but let's pick a number that's greater than negative 6, because remember this says y is greater than negative 6. So let's pick like, I don't know, negative 3 or 0 or any positive number, right? So let's pick 0, for example, because 0 is greater than negative 6, or negative 6 is less than 0, right? Hopefully you agree with that. So we go back up into the original inequality, and we do 0 divided by negative 3. And what's 0 divided by negative 3? Well, that's just 0. Is 2 less than 0? And you say, wait a second, it's not. That's not true at all. So what happened is that you didn't do anything wrong, but when you multiply or divide by a negative number, now we can go down here. If you multiply or divide by a negative number, you must change the direction of the symbol. So we change the direction of the symbol, and then everything that we just did has to go away because that was all wrong. So now when I multiply both sides, so now go back up to me, hopefully you were using a pencil. Now when we go back up here and we still multiply both sides by negative 3, that less than sign has to get switched to a greater than sign. So now y is less than negative 6, or negative 6 is greater than y. And we can do that by checking a number, right? Give me a number that's less than negative 6, so like let's say negative 9. I'm picking friendly numbers with 3. So now when I plug in, I get negative 9 divided by negative 3, which is 3, and 2 is less than 3, so that works. So now when I go to graph it, negative 6, I'm not allowed to be equal to it, but now I'm to the left of it. All the numbers that work are actually less than negative 6, even though the symbol was the other one when we started. Well, that's very sloppy, negative 6. It's still very sloppy. Anyway, you know what it is. Okay, so now let's look at letter B. So same thing, right? We're going to divide by negative 7, but when I divide, since I divided by a negative number, remember that's the rule, if you multiply or divide by a negative number, you have to change the direction of the symbol. So it's y is greater than or equal to 5. And we can check by plugging in a number, right? So like let's plug in a number that's bigger than 5, so we can do 6 or 7, okay? So negative 7 times 6 is negative 42, and negative 42 is less than negative 35, so that works. So inequalities are an example of when it's very important to check, and when you multiply or divide by a negative number, you have to remember to flip the symbol. And if you check, if you forgot, you'll catch yourself. If you don't check and you make that mistake, you'll never notice. Alright, let's scroll down and see what this might look like in a word problem. You earn $9.50 per hour at your summer job. Write and solve an inequality that represents the numbers of hours you need to work to buy a digital camera that costs $247. So the steps are down below, right? First step is to understand the problem. So we know our hourly wage, okay, so that's $9.50 per hour. And we know the cost of the digital camera, which is $247. We have to write and solve an inequality that represents the numbers of hours we need to work to buy this camera. Great. Totally get the problem. All right, now we need to come up with a plan. So let's use an inequality. Let's write one that would simulate this story, and then we can solve it and see if it makes sense. So what I'm going to do is my hourly wage, which is $9.50, times the number of hours that I work, is going to be greater than or equal to the cost of the camera. So if I work 1 hour, I make $9.50, which is not enough to make enough for this camera. If I work 2 hours, then I would do $9.50 times 2. If I work 10 hours, I would get $95, right? So I'm calculating all of this money. It has to be at least $247 because that's what I need for the camera. So I need $247 or more, which is greater than or equal to 247. So my question for you is, do I need to change the direction of the symbol when I divide? I don't, right? Because it's not a negative number, and you only do that when you multiply or divide by a negative number. It doesn't mean that this number is negative. It means that the number that you're dividing by is negative. So that's just something to point out. So now I get my calculator out, and I do 247 divided by 9.50, and I get that I need to work at least 26 hours. So now what we do is we look back and we see if that makes sense. So let's just round some of our numbers. So $9.50 is pretty close to $10, and this is pretty close to $250 for the camera. So if I wanted to make $250 and I was getting $10 an hour, that would be around 25 hours. So that kind of makes sense, right? Because it's a little less than $10, so I should need to work a little more than 25 hours. So that totally makes sense. If you have any questions, write them down and ask me when you come to class.